Now, currently the only way for us to add a new city to our application is going to be through the Cloud Firestore interface. So obviously that's not going to be a practical way for us to add cities. So let's go ahead and fix that. Now, what we're going to be doing here is when we click on this plus icon, we're going to have a modal pop up here with the ability for us to enter a name into an input field, and then that'll go ahead and add that city to our list here and then display that weather information. Okay, so to begin here, let's head over to our Vue project, and inside of components, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this modal.vue. Okay, now let's start with a Vue template here. And inside of here, we'll start with the script tag here. We'll give this a simple name, and we're going to just call this modal. Now for the HTML, it's going to be pretty simple. We're going to start with a div, and we're going to give this a class of modal, and we're also going to attach a attribute called ref, which we're going to also set to modal. So if you aren't familiar with Vue, a ref is pretty much a way for us to interact with this through the DOM. So instead of using, or I guess what it would be similar to is document.query selector and then the class name, but instead in Vue we're able to use the ref, and then we can call that within some of our methods to, assign it a class name, remove, stuff like that. So just think of it as something similar to a document.query selector. Okay, now inside of this modal class, we're going to have another div with a class of modal and wrap. And then we're also going to give this a ref value of modal wrap. And then inside of this div, we're going to have the input information for us to enter a city name. So we'll start off with the label here, and we'll say this is for city-name. And inside of this label, we're going to say enter and say location. All right, now after this, we're going to start with our input here, and it's going to have a text type. And then we want to give this a name of city-name. We want to give it a placeholder of search by city name. And then lastly, we're going to hook up a vModal to this so that we can hold the value of whatever the user types in a data property here in our script tag, or a data value. Okay, so let's go ahead and say vModal, and what we're going to give this is the name of city. Okay, so right now this is going to not be attached to anything because we haven't created that here in our script tag. So if we save this, and then to avoid any error, we're going to say data. We're going to open this up. We're going to say return, and then we're going to go ahead and give the data value of city and set that equal to null on the initial render of this page. So what I want to do next is to save some time here, because this is going to be some basic styling. I'm just going to copy this styling in for this section, and let me go ahead and grab that really quick. And let's go ahead and copy and paste this in here. So a quick rundown of what we're doing here is we're just pretty much positioning the modal fixed so that it stays center in the whole entire page, and then we're going to align all the content inside of this modal to the center using Flexbox. And then you can see the modal wrap here. We got a box shadow, background color, and nothing really too complicated here, just some simple styling. So I'll go ahead and let you pause the video here if you want to copy this. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and leave it in the repository for this section. And you can find that repository down in the link below. Okay, so that is going to be the simple layout for our modals. So let's go ahead and import this into our project here. So what we want to do is we're going to actually import this into the app. And inside of the div class main, we're going to have this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this down here. We're going to call this modal. And then let's change this to modal. And then let's go ahead and add it right below our navigation component here. And then what we're going to do is I'll just copy this down as well, and we'll change this one to modal. Okay, so now if we save this, you should see that we have our modal up here by default. Now obviously we're not going to want to display this on the initial render, so what we're going to do is we're going to attach a VIF to this to only show this when a certain condition is true. So what we're going to say is if modal open is true. So right now we don't have modal open defined, so it's gonna this is gonna be false, so we shouldn't see that modal here any longer. So let's go ahead and add this data below cities, modal open, and we're gonna set this equal to null upon the initial render. So currently right now, what we want to have happen hypothetically is you want to click this plus icon and then open the modal. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to the navigation component here, and the class or the item we want to make that modal appear is when we click on this right here. So what we're going to say is we're going to pass it a click method. So we're going to say at click, and then we're going to open this up, and then we want to run the city or the function called add city whenever we click on this icon here. Okay, so what we need to do now is we're going to come down to our methods here, and or we're going to come down and create a method. So we need to open our methods, and what we want to say is we're going to create the function of add city. Now, inside of here, what we're going to be doing is what we call a view custom event. So what's going to happen here is we're going to click on this icon here. It's going to fire this function. Now, inside of this function, we're going to create a custom event that's going to go back to our app.view here. And then when that event is heard and we're going to put the listener on the modal, then we'll go ahead and display our modal open by running another function and then setting this value to true. Okay, so let me show you how that's going to look. So to create a custom event, we simply say this dot money sign emit, and then we say the name of the custom event we want to run. So in this case, we're going to say add city. Okay, now if we save this and we head back over to our app.view, we can listen for that event to be run by putting in a listener on our modal here. So what that's going to look like is we're going to say v-on, and we want to look for the name of that event we just created, which is going to be called, let me go back here, add city. So what we want to say, or I'm sorry, that's actually on our navigation, so we actually don't want to do it on the modal, my mistake. So we're going to say v on, and we're going to say, come over here, and we're going to say add city. Now, when we are listening for this event on our navigation, and I put it on the wrong one again, I'm sorry about that, and not want to delete that. Let me just copy this really quick, remove it. So there we go. That's the right one. So what's going to happen is when we hear this event add city on this navigation component, we're now going to run the function to change this modal open value to true, which then should open our modal, which is listening or is checking the condition of modal open, which right now is set to null. So let's go ahead and finish this off. So we're going to say on city, when this event happens, we're going to create a function called toggle modal, and then we'll go ahead and just shrink this up here, and we're going to say toggle modal, and then we'll open this up, and we want to say this dot modal open, and we want to set it to equal the opposite of what it currently is. So we can do that by putting an exclamation point in front of this and simply saying this dot modal open. Now if we head back over to our application here, now we should see that when we click on this plus icon, we should have the modal. Let me just refresh it to clear those console errors there, and everything looks good. So let's cross our fingers and hope this works. If I click it, you should see now that we have the modal appearing. So that is great. Now the one problem we're going to encounter is actually closing out this modal if we maybe accidentally clicked on it or just want to open up to see what it is and we actually don't want to add a city. We can't actually close this modal unless we go ahead and refresh the page, which we don't want to do. So what we're going to do to fix that is we're going to listen for a click on the modal, and then when we hear a click, we're going to run a function to close out the modal. All right, so let's go ahead and start on this. So what we want to do is inside of our modal component here, we're going to pass on the div of modal a click, and we want to run a function when we click on this called close modal. All right, Now inside of our script tag here, we need to go ahead and create our methods, which we don't have in this component yet. So let's go ahead and do that. Now inside of here, we want to run close modal. Now what we're going to do is similar to how we did it in our navigation. We're going to run a custom event, and we're going to listen for that custom event here on the app. And when that event is heard, we're going to simply go ahead and just toggle the modal open data to false. Okay, so let's go ahead and start by saying this dot, let's see, emit. We don't need two of these. And we're going to say, let's create this, or this is going to be a custom event called close modal. All right, so now if we head over to our app.view, we can listen for it the same way we did on our navigation. So to save some time, I'm just going to say copy this, and then we want to listen for close modal, and then we can simply go ahead and run the toggle.modal property. Okay, so if we head over to our application here and we refresh it, now what should happen if I click on the plus and we click over here, it should close. Now I want you to pay attention to one problem this is going to cause. Now if I want to go ahead and click on the input field, it closes. So this is where our ref attribute here is going to come in handy. So what we want to do is we want to say only close it if the click is on this div right here, or I'm sorry, if so we want to say if the click is on this div, then we want to emit the close modal custom event here. If it isn't, then do nothing. So what we're going to say is we can pass this close modal function the event property, or the event parameter. We're going to call that, or we're going to give that the letter E. And we want to run a condition here, and we're going to say if e.target is equal to, now how we refer to our ref inside of a function here is we say this dot money sign refs dot the name we gave it, which is modal. So this is going to get a reference to this div right here without us having to actually define it using a document that query selector. So as you can see, this makes interacting with the DOM so much easier. And then what we want to say, if this is true, then we are going to run this custom event. So if we put this in here and save that, we should now see, if we open this up and we click outside of that, we are able to close out our modal. Now if we click inside of here, it's not going to close. And I just realized we actually are missing the add button here at the very bottom. So let's go ahead and add that button and add, and let me see. There we go, that looks a lot better. So that was looking quite off. So as you can see now anyways, when we click on the modal on the outside of it, it closes, but on the inside it will not close. All right, so the front end is done to where we can actually, you know, open the modal and enter a name. But if we say, for example, try to add a city here of, I don't know, Warren, and we hit add, nothing is going to happen. So that's going to require us to do some work with our Cloud Firestore and Firebase. So let's head back to our Vue project and beginning hooking up the ability to add this new city to our application. Let's begin by breaking down how this is going to work. So when a user clicks on the add button here, we're going to fire a function. Now the function is going to first look at this input value here, right here, and make sure that it is simply not blank. Now that's the only validation we're going to be performing for this application for now. So if that is not empty and it does contain an actual city name or data, then we want to reach out to our WeatherMap API and get that current weather information according to that city. Then after that, we're going to reach out to our Firestore collection, create a new document with the city name and also the current weather, and then that's all we'll have to do, and we should be able to see that information here on our application. So let's begin by hooking up a click event to our button here. So we're going to say @click, and we want to call this function a name of add city. So let's head down to our methods here, and below close modal, we'll say add city. Now, before we begin here, a few things we're going to be using off the bat. We're going to want to import our Axios so we don't get an error. So we're going to import Axios from Axios. And we're also going to be using Firestore, but I'll add that before we actually add the code to talk to our Firestore collection, because otherwise we'll get an error, and we don't want that. And then the other thing we're going to need to actually get access to is our API key, since we're going to be making a request out to the OpenWeatherMap API. So what we're going to need to do is come into our app.vue here, and we're going to want to vbind this API key to our Modal component here. So let's go ahead and say vbind, and we're going to say API and say key. Now, the shorthand version for this, as you may see me use a few times, is simply going to be the colon and then the name of the prop or the data value here, and then we set that equal to API key. So this right here, how we were binding our cities, is the same as if we were to do it right here. This is a shorthand version. Now, whatever you want to do for your project is up to you. I guess this way looks a little bit more visual in terms of what you're doing, where you can maybe not necessarily know unless you are aware of the shorthand, but both of these ways are acceptable and they are exactly the same. So now if we save this and head back to our Modal, just below the name, let's go ahead and accept that prop, and we'll set this equal to an empty array, and we'll say API key. All right, so now we have access to that value of our API key, so we can use it inside of this function, or this whole component, that is. So the first thing we want to do is make a check to this input value right here. Now, before I forget, the way we're going to do our check, we actually don't want this equal to null. We're going to change this to an empty string. All right, so what we're going to say here is if this dot city, referring to this right here, if this equals an empty string, then we want to alert them saying, hey, we want to, make sure that's actually not empty. So we'll say field cannot be empty, something like that. All right, so else if it actually is not empty, we want to run the code to reach out to our weather map API and get the current weather information. So I actually also want to run this asynchronously, so we're going to say async here, and then we want to make a new variable here called res, and we're going to set this equal to await, and then I'm going to copy in the Axios get method here, and let's go ahead and paste that in. So what we're going to be saying here is await Axios.get, and we're passing it this dot city, which is going to equal whatever city the user has put into the input field here, and then we're using our API key. All right, now from here let's see here, we don't want to have that in there. I don't know where that came from. So let's go ahead and save this, and just below this variable here, we're going to create another one called data, and we're going to set this equal to await res.data. And for now, let's just go ahead and console our log is to the console. So console.log and say data. So now if we head over to our application, I'll just refresh it to make sure it's up to date. If we click on this plus right here and we try to add a empty location, it'll say field cannot be empty, so that's working great. So let's go ahead and add a city name. We'll use Warren, and if I click add, you should see now we're going to get that information for Warren from our OpenWeatherMap API, so that is all working great. Now let's go ahead and remove this. And then what we want to do is once we have this data, we can now reach out to our Firestore to create a new collection item and then assign it the data that we have inside of this modal. So we have the city name and also this data we have returned from our API. So what we want to do is we're going to need to import our Firestore database. So we're going to say import db from, and we want to actually go out of here. So let's save here, and we're going to say Firebase and then Firebase init. And we'll put a semicolon there. So we don't need this console.log anymore, so we can say db.collection, and we want to refer to our cities collection. And we want to create a new doc. So we can say .doc, and then we want to set that document to the data we have here in this modal. So we're going to use a set method and pass it an object. And inside of here, we're going to say city, and this is going to equal this .city, which is right here. And then we want to set the current, let's see, weather to equal the data. All right, and that should be good. Now, what we also want to do is after this is complete, so if I say this, it'll format it more to look a little better here and kind of make more sense. So right now what's happening is we are going to reach out to our collection of cities, create a new doc by using the .doc method, and then we're setting this document to the information right here, which we have the field of city and current weather, which is already defined in our Firestore collection. Then after this, we want to simply close the modal. So what we can do is we can tack on a then method here, and we can run a callback function in here. And all we need to do is run this event right here, which we already created. So we're going to say this .emit close modal. So now if we head over to our application here and we create a new city, let's call it Warren, and we hit add, you should see now that we have Warren added right here, and you can see the formatting is a little off, and we'll fix that. So if we head over to our Firestore database here, you should see now we have, let's see, Warren right here. So that is working great. Now I do want to fix the one issue that you're seeing here with this. So what's going on is because we don't have enough, pretty much what's happening here is this is set to 100 VH, so it is not defining the grid rows here. So what we can do is head over to, let's see here, we have to go to, I believe, is it add city? Yes, so we want to set, I believe it was the grid auto rows on here, minimum width of, I think actually on the whole thing, so we're going to say grid auto rows, and we're going to set that to a width of 250 pixels, and that should resolve our issue there. And as you can see now, it looks a lot better. So now, for example, let's add another city here. Let's just go and say New York, and if we add that, you should see that now in real time we are able to add cities to our interface here. So that is working great.